districts really throughout southeast Minnesota. And they do a lot of quality staff development and provide a lot of opportunities for teachers to learn different things to educate their kids. And so we've been kind of studying joining the partnership for a couple years now, and this last fall we joined. And as part of that, they have a program that is their Educator of the Year. And so, you know, we haven't been part of it, and I think it's a conglomerate of, there's multiple school districts. 17, so I think there's about 17 school districts that are part of it throughout southeast Minnesota, and to kind of show off and, you know, tell what we're doing here in Albert Lea, we encourage some folks to apply for something called the Educator of the Year Award for the Rochester Area Math Science Partnership. And lo and behold, they had a number of finalists, and I think Mark Nikonaki was in the top 10 as far as Educators of the Year. And Miss Kristen Seeger here was one of the two individuals named as Educator of the Year for the Rochester Area Math Science Partnership. So here we're in it less than a year, and we're already sharing what we're doing with what's going on. So I just asked Kristen before she came up here, I said, "You gonna do your presentation tonight?" She's like, "No." So what happened at the awards banquet in January, they emailed the winners, and they said, "We'd like you to put something together." What was like a 15-minute presentation?
Be prepared to speak for 15 minutes.
So she put together a 72-slideshow.
So I talk on every slide.
No, it was very good.
Played through.
It was. She represented the district extremely well, and we're very proud of. We're very proud to have you show your talents to everybody. But internally, we're very appreciative for everything you do for us, Kristen.
Thank you.
So on behalf of the district, I would like to present you the certificate of recognition. Congratulations.
Thank you very much. Thank you, guys.
It's great to see that happen. So thank you, Kristen.
Thank you.
Next, we'll move on to approval of today's agenda. Is there a motion to do so? Is there a second to the motion? Second. Okay, the motion's been made and seconded. All in favor of approving today's agenda signify by saying aye. 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 Pose same sign. Motion carries. Next, we have the consent items. Sir, what are your wishes, board?
Move to approve.
Okay. Is there a second to that motion?
Second.
Okay, we have a motion and a second for the consent items. So all those in favor signify by saying aye. 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 Pose same sign. Motion carries. Moving on to reports. Mike.
So a couple slides this evening. First one, go ahead, Angela, next slide. I want to touch base on the safe, healthy, welcoming schools. We saw the tragedy that occurred in Florida last week, and I just wanted to reaffirm with the board that as a district, we're doing what we can to make sure that our teachers and our students are equipped to deal with such a traumatic event as much as they can be if it were to ever occur here in Albert Lea. I think what was striking to me about the trauma in Florida is people always say, well, never in my community is this going to happen. I think I read in the news that that community had just been named this past year the safest place in Florida. And so our society is evolving to where this could take place at any time. And, you know, we met as a cabinet last week and talked with the principals, and what we are doing here with the ALICE training is reactive. And it is, okay, if something bad happens, how are we going to react? And what I encourage with the principals is we need to be as proactive as possible to identify students who may be struggling so that we're aware and we can try to nip some of these things in the bud before they get out of control like this. So, so that's the proactive piece. And, you know, I think as a district, you've seen us increase the number of counselors throughout the district just this past year. There's a lot of other things that we've been doing. But when we get to the reactive piece, I just want to make sure that the board is aware that we are doing what we can to prepare our staff and our students. And ironically, I sent a letter home, I don't know if it was the Wednesday of, I don't know if the shooting was on Thursday or Wednesday, it was either the day of or the day before the shooting occurred, telling parents that we are going to be conducting ALICE-type exercises with their students over the next few months as we become more proficient at this type of training. And so the other piece I want to assure the board is that this isn't a one-shot deal, that we will continue with when new staff on board in the spring or in the fall, we will be training them as they come on. And right now, we only have about 300 people trained in the district, and we would like to get that training to the point where we have all support staff trained on that as well, and to include, you know, the substitute teachers who would be potentially in harm's way as well. So it's not a comfortable topic to talk about, but as a district, we are definitely trying to be as proactive as we can in preparing for issues such as this. Slide, please. The other thing is that we haven't really talked about at the board level yet is e-learning days. And we've had 2 of them so far this year, and I know many people were hoping for another one today. And they've been pretty successful. And both Mark Grossklaus and Steve Kovach have gotten feedback from their staff at the high school level or at the secondary level, and they're adjusting their workload expectations for students to make sure we're not overwhelming them. I know at the high school we give kids 2 weeks to do the work that we send out for an e-learning day. And so we're adjusting that. I've heard from a lot of folks in the community that the bingo cards we use, K5, have been very popular with a lot of families. So that's an update on those 2 things, subject to your questions.
Any questions? Okay, we'll move on to board reports, and I want to start, I think I started over there last time, Angie.
I don't think I have anything to report. Thanks.
Just enjoyed the last few weeks of visiting about our project we're going to talk about a little bit later, and want to congratulate our high school wrestlers. Coach Score over there is part of them, and looking forward to watching our hockey and the other teams progress into their section play too.
I guess I'll just report that Family Services Collaborative is going through a little bit of a transition right now. The former hired collaborator had left for another position locally, so a new one was hired, and then that one has just resigned. So kind of going through a little bit of transition with that. So if anybody knows of any good people that might be a good candidate to head that group, please let us know. And then also on Monday, the 26th, I believe, from 11 to 1, they'll be having a strategic planning session. Thank you. It's kind of a mixture, I think, of communication, but also a lot of health services as well as beneficial. It doesn't have to be, but it helps different groups in the community to work together, whether it's school boards, the public health, churches, that kind of thing. Thank you.
In addition to the financial meeting that I have been to since our last meeting, which I think we'll forego that until we get to discussion on that item. But I did attend a meeting at Riverland. I'm on the PSEO Concurrent Advisory Committee, along with Jeff Halverson from the high school. And I've been involved in the concurrent CIS program for a long time, ever since it began, actually. And I'm sure most of you know that that's sort of an alternative to AP, and they're both wonderful programs. But this committee, whose meeting I attended last week, is more of an administrative sort of a committee. My involvement previously was as a teacher when it was the staff from the schools that are involved in CIS courses would meet with their cohorts at Riverland and compare notes, and it's good to just like our staff in-house, it's always good to have an opportunity to talk to each other. Anyway, one of the things, there's quite a number of items on the agenda, but the one that most piqued my interest had to do with the advent of technology courses that are now going to be offered as CIS. You know, you don't normally think of something like welding as a college in the school's course, but it will be, and a whole bunch of other things that are completely consistent with what we've been doing in our district. A number of people have been very actively involved in that, and I'm encouraged to note that we are increasing our involvement in an educational program other than the traditional pre-college program. So that was exciting. That's it.
Okay, thank you and congratulations, Neil, along with the wrestlers. For myself, I went to the science fair, and it was interesting to walk around and see all the projects, and I did learn that what toothpaste keeps your teeth the whitest, because there was 2 of them and they both came out with the same conclusion, so that was interesting. And then I also went to the noon Kiwanis. They had requested that I come and talk about the potential project, and so I went to the noon Kiwanis. So we'll move on to student reports. Gigi or Ella?
Well, first off, just a little advertising. The robotics club is having a burger basket on Thursday, and then the students going on the Costa Rica trip is having burger basket next week. It'd be awesome if people came out for that. And then with the student council, we also have some money to spend decorating the school and any upgrades, so we're working on that too.
So where are the burgers at?
At the Moose Lodge.
It is on, sorry. Just like going off of what the student council is, we just wrapped up Winterfest, and now, as Gigi said, we're starting to look at some other projects, and that should be fun. That's all.
Gigi, I know you're being modest, but tell the board what you just were recognized for.
I was also chosen for one of the Excel Award for the Minnesota State, so that was cool.
So there's a handful of kids throughout the state that are picked from the State High School League, in this case, juniors. And so Gigi was submitted as a representative from Albert Lee. And when's the last time we won Excel? Not in my years here. Okay, so it's been quite a few years since we've had somebody. So great job.
Okay, and our last report is from the teachers. Mike?
Nothing really to add, but Dave Klotz stopped by and gave me the blueprints for the tiny house from Alexandria, so he seems interested in that. If the funding's there, Dave, we'll try anything. So, but no, our students in the shop they're getting to the stage of most are working on their projects right now, and using their hands, learning what they can. And to the post-secondary stuff, Jeff Jansen, my counterpart has done a lot in that area to get a lot of those agreements hammered out. So let's give him some credit. And that's about it. Any questions?
Okay, thank you. Next, we have, under curriculum and instruction, junior high school update. Afton?
All right. So I was asked, because I know that there has been some questions, especially with the topic of the facilities, but many questions regarding junior high athletics. And so I was just asked to present just kind of some background so you guys have an understanding of right now where we currently sit with junior high athletics in Albert Lea, and then looking at across the Big Nine Conference. We know that it's always great to look at what other schools are doing, providing some feedback and some questions that you guys may have, because I think that you may be hearing it from the community and asking questions regarding junior high athletics. You can go to the next one. So what we've done is we've just taken all of our Big Nine schools, and season by season, what you will see represented is all of the offerings for athletics in the fall. And that's going to be along the side, along the bottoms are the districts that are within our conference. And just to kind of clarify what the X means, the X is actually designating the schools that offer a specific junior high program. So that means that it is a designated schedule for that season. And as you'll see, and I'll kind of explain here too, is that just because we don't have a specific junior high athletic program that is run and has a specific schedule for our 7th and 8th graders, we do incorporate many of those 7th and 8th graders into our high school programs as well. So again, across the board, you'll be able to see those X's that truly provide a specific schedule for those junior high events. Here in Albert Lea, we do have volleyball and football that are both run for 6th, 7th, and 8th grade. John Double is our middle school activities director there, and so he is in charge of scheduling those events and working with other schools within our area, not specifically the Big Nine, but many of the Big Nine schools do come into play with our schedule there. And looking across the board too, and you can just kind of read that yourself and see the orange, obviously are schools that do not have a sports-specific program for their junior high. I've also just labeled there too what the other programs within our season for fall here in Albert Lea, what our 7th and 8th graders are offered for opportunities. That may not be a specific middle school program, but they are able to compete with our high school program. You can go to the next one. Next is winter. Again, same thing. Those X's are going to provide those schools that have those specific schedules. Albert Lea, we do not have any middle school specific programming, but we do have options that our 7th and 8th graders are able to compete at some of our high school level for those programs that are listed. And you can go to the next one. And lastly, we have our spring sports. As you'll see, we kind of have an abundance of those offerings that are really falling in the fall season. Winter becomes less and less. Spring, we start to jump back up a little bit. Again, the Albert Lea programs, we don't have any junior high specific. We do have some track options, though, that we do have our middle schoolers who are participating on our high school program. They do have a couple of meets that are just for junior high. So even though we are not specifically a junior high specific schedule for them, they compete with our high schoolers. They have their coaching that's done by our high school staff, but there are some opportunities for some specific meets for those 7th and 8th graders in that program. You can go to the next one. We also just wanted to kind of add on too, just so that we're aware regarding programming in Albert Lea, is that we've actually been granted the opportunity to be adding coaches to some of our staffs. As you can see, since 2014, our dance team has grown in numbers. That is an 8th through 12th grade program. We were able to add a dance team varsity assistant coach because of those numbers and the needs that they have in their program. Girls hockey and boys hockey, again, mainly due to the nature of that sport and because of the numbers that are increasing within that program. We've also added a varsity assistant to those. New this year, speech has been brought back, so we have a speech advisor that's on staff. And, you know, obviously we've had that in the past, but it's been some years that we've had staff that has been interested in that position. So thankfully we've had somebody step up this year and starting to get that program going again. We've also had an assistant mock trial coach added, and we have 3 teams within our mock trial program this year on the activity side of things. So it's great to see the growth that we have within our programs right now, the things that we're able to do as a district to provide some of those extra resources to our students so that they are getting the coaching and the advising that they're needing. One of the biggest things, too, is that we talk about when we hire our new coaches, specifically our head coaches, is we talk about the collaboration that they have within their youth programs. We know how important it is right now, specifically because we know that our youth associations, our youth booster clubs are so important and vital to the success of our high school programs as well, that we really are stressing our head coaches have that collaboration with our youth associations. Not expecting our head coaches to run those programs, because we know that they have their high school program that they're really concentrating on, but to have that collaboration so that those youth associations are going to be able to feed off of what our high school programs are expecting. And it's a much easier transition throughout that whole program to make sure that, you know, we again are bringing some of that educational based athletics into that youth program as well, by having that mentorship of our high school coaches that are involved in our youth programming. So that's kind of just an overview of right now what we're seeing here in Albert Lea and then across our conference in junior high athletics. I'm willing to take any questions that you guys may have on that you've been receiving from the community.
Afton, could you go back to one of those first slides
Absolutely.
that had the X's, just so I'm sure I'm understanding correctly.
Sure.
So ones with the X's have a designated junior high
Yep.
schedule. And then the ones that are specified, for example, girls 7th and 8th, those girls can participate with our high school?
Our high school program, yes.
Okay.
Yep.
And so some of the other schools that have the gold, they might have the same kind of
Correct.
thing in that piece? Okay.
Correct. Yep. And again, we can draw that research out too, but I just wanted to make sure that we drew that out for Albert Lea and, what we see as our opportunities for participation. But yeah, that's correct. Some of those orange, it doesn't mean that they don't have 7th and 8th graders participating. It's just that it's not a junior high specific program.
Thank you. And
Yeah.
can you explain the cuts that were made a few years ago? I know I was on the board then, but I think that they were, I understood it to be like duplication with the city. Is that what was going on with that? And can you maybe explain how it affected these here?
Right. And I don't have the in-depth information, and maybe Dr. Funk can
I can help
comment
you
on
there.
that a little bit more.
Yep, so I can't remember the year, it was 2011 or 12. So what we took a look at, and what really started to drive this discussion, was gym space at the middle school. And part of the issue was we had, in the duplication piece, and it was basketball was the primary one I'm going to speak to right now. We had concerns from the community that we had youth basketball practice that would take precedent because it was a district event, and so we would have gym time there. And some of the community basketball teams were not coming in to practice till later into the evening because it was just a space issue. And speaking for basketball itself right now, basketball was an intramural type sport. So what we did is, if I recall properly, before Christmas, I don't remember if it was boys or girls, but they would have a couple months of basketball before Christmas. After the holiday break, it would switch. So boys would be in the fall, or the pre-holiday, girls would be in the winter. And really what it was an opportunity for kids to play basketball. And it was pretty much in-house. It wasn't a traveling program like we have with the city. And so we took a look at that, and we had I think it was run through Community Ed, and that was the city contributed some money, Community Ed did, and the district did. And so we took a look at basketball because it had a strong community program, and we took a look at I think softball and baseball. And what we were facing in the spring was very similar. Kids would be playing baseball, And that worked okay for a few weeks because they'd be on one team, and then Knights baseball would start up, and then we would have the, kids, we would struggle because, okay, well, I got to go to Knights baseball practice. That's more important. That's traveling. So that was the decision we made, and the recommendation to the board back then. The other interesting thing that we don't talk a lot about is we used to charge the community teams to use the gym space and the facilities. When we went away from having our own program, we now allow all the community teams to use the facilities free of charge. So I think that was kind of an agreement that we made with them when we did this to try to help them out in this case. So that's a little bit of background on that.
So Afton, when you talk about this collaboration and mentorship of our varsity head coaches, define that a little bit, because I haven't seen our youth tackle football program start up and some of the other programs that we've talked about with our coaches and the hiring, and I'm just kind of want to see what your expectations are of our head coaches first.
Yeah, absolutely. Basically the collaboration is working with the youth programs that are in place that we have right now. We can, talk about specifically football. I would love to have the conversation, with Coach Black, is that I actually, my husband and myself attended a meeting a year and a half ago with intentions that our coach wanted to start up a program here, because we knew that we had youth that were going to Alden to participate. We're really seeing a lack of initiative on parts of other community members to be able to step up and to help run those programs, because that's really what we need. Like I said, our head coaches can't run youth programs. They can be a collaboration. They can be there to be a mentor, and what they see is going to be things that will help impact their high school program. But to truly run a program, that's not what we expect of our head coaches. For football, again, there's a lot that personal finances that our head coach has put in himself to try and get these things going, and it's definitely more than a one-man show, and we need the community support and the effort to come forward and to do something like that. So specifically on that, I think there's much more that you may have led to that there hasn't been any initiative, as there certainly has. We'd be happy to talk to you about that, but we definitely need the community support and the parents to be engaged in it and help with those things, because again, we know that the strength of a youth program definitely shines through, and we're seeing that in some of our high school programs too, and we would love for all of our programs to get to that point where that strength of their youth program is top notch. But again, our head coach is not someone we're looking to create that, but they are a partnership in that, and to collaborate and to hold clinics with their youth coaches, so that they are on kind of the same path on the board on what their expectations are, what they're wanting to see, and maybe that they're not seeing with students who are coming up to the high school level and lacking in some skill development.
I remember back in 2005, and I think we probably all we had two teams in the state tournament that year, our basketball team and our hockey team, and I can even go back to when just happened that my oldest son was in the 2005 class, but I can remember back to when he was in 5th grade, and we were doing not only junior high basketball, which, by the way, in order to be a traveler, they had to play school ball. There wasn't any of one or the other. You could just play school ball, not traveling, but you had to do both if you wanted to travel. But I still remember what I thought probably the biggest thing was when Jason Bakke was down there. And I would say after the first 2 practices, he knew every one of the kids' names. And not only did he guide them, he took the time to be there. And if we want to get back to those competitive times, like you said, that's a collaboration. He didn't run the program, but he was there at the program. And, I guess it seemed like we took 10 Greyhound buses up there for that basketball tournament. You were maybe a trainer at that point, but it was a lot of fun for the community. And I remember back in 2004 when Ben Woodside was a senior, and even when he was a junior, we brought in extra bleachers, and the gymnasium was packed full. And I was there the other night for Ryan Moore's scholarship night, which we had quite a few people. It was a lot of fun to see some of the alumni back. But I guess the thing that I'm getting at is it would be nice to see this. I mean, we looked at the Big Nine schools up here and who participates in junior athletics. Rochester, of course, is going to have their own youth program. My question on that again, I'm just looking at the volleyball, football. Is that an intramural schedule for both of those, or do we actually play some other teams outside of here? And then also, and I think I know most of that, but also then I was curious about maybe looking at, for a lack of a better saving some money and travel and that, if we were able to look at the New Richlands or the Aldens and teams like that, would there be a way to get it? Because, we don't have to travel. Junior athletics isn't about winning. It's about learning to play, learning to enjoy to play, and finding out you're not going to get hurt so that you want to continue your progress. That's why, and I heard that from a lot of community members. I think it's totally different from what we're talking about tonight on the facility scheduling and all that. It's a separate issue. However, the programming part is something that would be nice to see us be able to boost it up some way. And that's why I'm just thinking of some of these other towns around here, or, just scheduling that, maybe give them an opportunity to play someone else where they can come together.
Yeah, specifically for volleyball and football, our 6th grade is intramural, and so they are playing each other. There's not traveling involved, but our 7th and 8th grade does travel. And I will say scheduling can be a deficit with some junior high. It is hard to schedule, and we are seeing that and hearing that across the board from our other schools too. They're not a part of a conference, and so that does provide some challenges. But absolutely, we know that there are benefits when we're competing against others. And I know that going back to involvement in let's say JO volleyball and AAU basketball, we find challenges in that because we are seeing that our families are choosing to go that route. And so, we know that we're going to fight that battle as well. So definitely pros and cons. And we know that the more we can get our kiddos playing, participating, having fun, that's our utmost goal for them. So.
Well, I don't know a lot about sports. I've been trying really hard to educate myself out of that. I had a couple conversations with Mike about it because I have heard from the community as well. And I guess the 3 sports that I've heard the most about, baseball, softball, and basketball, that some community members are wanting them in the district. And I guess the top 2 reasons I think that I've heard is just kind of what Dave was saying, the competitiveness, that we'd be more competitive at the high school level if we had it at the junior high level. And then also the other comment that I heard was that you might get a broad cross-section of students participating if it was in the district rather than provided by a community group or something. So I'm still trying to learn about the athletics and what's typically, so thank you so much for this. Can you send this to us too? Because kind of learning what exactly we're offering, and it's kind of nice to see us compared to everyone else because I didn't know what was typical. But I just wanted to share kind of what I've been hearing from the community.
Like you, Angie, I don't really know too much about sports either. The longer I'm involved, it seems like the less I know. But I do know this, that, and it's consistent with what Dave was saying, and you too, Afton, is that the head coach can't do everything, but the head coach has to be very good at making sure that somebody does everything. And if you're going to be successful, and that's a whole other subject, what do you mean by successful? But as far as I'm concerned, success means having a lot of people enthusiastic about your program, including our student athletes, but more than that, the whole community. And it's kind of the head coach's responsibility to make sure that happens. And that includes working with administration, working with the students, obviously, working with the Boosters Club. You cannot do it without a good Boosters Club, and it's the Boosters Club usually that's going to provide the youth program, and the head coach has to be firmly in touch with that. The head coach should not be the coach that coaches those young people, but had better have a handle on the whole situation. The head coach is kind of the chairman of the board that's aware of everything that's going on. And if you're going to have a successful program, that person has to be good at it. And that's about the only thing I might know.
All right, any other questions for Afton? If not, we'll move on to an update on the activity code.
All right, so we've been asked to kind of come back and do some review on where we're at, and I will be flat out honest with you is that we put in the time, and we are not ready to be done. We think that this is an area that absolutely needed to be looked at and revamped, and a lot of time and thought and feedback from our coaching staff has been tremendous with this. So I want to take you to where we're at right now, and we have a great hold on kind of where we're wanting to be. So you can go to the next slide, Angela. So basically, what we're looking at is this is our revamped proposal for our chemical violation policy. The highlighted area is the area that we are wanting to dig into more, and that's why we're not satisfied with what we have right now. Is we want to research this more, and we want to reach out into our community and see what other offerings are available to our students who become a part of this situation. But what we're looking at is for our first violation is that we are looking at going back to the Minnesota State High School League minimum, and we use the minimum lightly. We don't want this to be perceived as that we're falling back on things and that our expectations are getting lower, because as you'll see with some follow-up is that that's not the case, but it's truly just looking at their time out of competition. We would be looking at, for the first violation, that the student would lose eligibility for the next or the following two academic or athletic contests, or the 2 weeks, so whichever is longer. So that will depend on your season. If you look at a football season versus a basketball season, football has one game a week. Basketball has the potential of having 3 games a week. So we're really looking at that, which is longer. So it's a 2-week or 2-event suspension from athletics. But the biggest thing that we really wanted to fall back on is what other criteria are we looking at? And I know that it was, brought to their attention that we really want to focus on the educational piece. And that's where we want to spend some more time on reaching out to our community partners. The 3 criteria that we also want to add on is the chemical education course. And this is something that's not been in our violation policy previously. And we do feel it's important because, of course, we're an education-based entity, and we want to provide that education to our students who are faced with these situations. You'll see in a few more slides is that's our catch, is finding what community entity is going to be able to provide that option the best for us. Felton Centers here in town, they do have offerings. However, they're only offered 4 times a year. And so that's a setback to us. That doesn't line up with what we want for our students. We will see in a little bit here too is that there is an option for Fountain Centers out of Owatonna that does meet once a month, and it is a 4-hour class. The student does attend with their parent. There is a cost to it, and of course there's the drive to it, but the basis of that is really just an educational 4-hour opportunity for our students to be able to go and to hear. The second thing that we want to add to the criteria is it's nothing new, but it really is focusing on their attendance, and that's going to be both in a chemical education course, school, and athletics. We know that school and athletics, that criteria is already set, so that is nothing new, but we wanted to make sure that that is put out there and it's emphasized in this policy. And the third criteria is community service, and we do feel that there are great benefits to this. And the things that we had talked about as a group, our head coaches, is the community service is just a great opportunity for our students to go out there and to give of themselves in this opportunity. Whether that be going out and coaching at a youth level, which is something that we really focused on, because not only is that helping them as an individual, they're staying within the sport because we know that that's something that they care deeply about, and we want to keep them them connected to that. So those community service hours, we think that are invaluable. Again, what we're looking at is that those 2 weeks, 2 events. We still want to do our research on the chemical education course, because to us, we think that that is one of the main criteria that we want to have as a benefit to our students. But we haven't nailed down the best opportunity that we have within our community or close in our surrounding communities. There are other options and bullet points on the bottom. We did point out if a student is determined to be a host or a provider, that we would actually up that suspension to a 50% of their season, which is what we had previously for all first violations. We just feel that, again, the context of that, of being a host or a provider, that there are different circumstances where we feel that this is requiring a bit more of a penalty. On the bottom, again, it's returning to competition does require that our students are meeting all of these expectations. Obviously, their limits on competition, but then also the 3 criteria that we had listed. You can go to the next one, Angela. So for our second violation, this is where we would have our student lose eligibility for 50% of the season. The 3 criteria are still going to be in effect. Again, the focus and the information that we want to seek a little bit more is that chemical education course, the absences in school, chemical education, and athletics, and then we have an increase in our community service hours at that point. We are still looking at having a little bit more of a strict penalty for if they are a host or a provider. And then also, again, for them to return to competition, we do need the requirements to all be met before that time is returned. And the last one, third and subsequent violation penalty. At this point, the student shall lose an eligibility for further participation. However, if that student enters and completes a chemical dependency program or treatment program, the student may be reinstated with a minimum of a 1-year calendar year suspension from athletics. I'm going to have you go to that next slide. This is something I just wanted to show. I know it's small here, but this is what we have found, and this is kind of where we need our community support, and I look at you guys because I know that you're involved in our community too as our options. This is the one out of Owatonna through Fountain Centers. It's offered once a month. It is a great thing that it also requires that a parent attend to, because we know that that collaboration and having that connection through both myself, the student, the parent, and the coach is a very helpful avenue if we have everyone on board for that. So this right now is the best options we found for our chemical education courses, because again, we want to put that education in the forefront, and we want to make sure that we're going through and we're providing our students the best resources possible in these situations. So again, I wanted to bring it to where we sit right now. I don't feel that this is done. It's not adequate. We want to spend more time on it, and I know that we feel that for us to prepare to implement next year, we have some time, and we really want to focus on that.
Go ahead.
Afton. I should be familiar with the minimum Minnesota State High School League penalties, but it seems to me that the first, second, and third violations are all pretty much consistent with the minimal high school league penalties. Is that correct? And then we've added things.
As far as participation in contests, the first violation does meet up with the Minnesota State High School League minimum. With the State High School League, the second violation would actually go to it's a 6-week or it's a 6-event or 3-week suspension. So we're sitting at about what the State High School League is for that, but we are adding those 3 criteria as well.
Okay, and I'm encouraged. By all means, take your time on this. It's a very important issue. And I'm also encouraged to hear that the coaches are being actively involved in this whole process. And I will graciously leave it into your hands and theirs. I am a little concerned about some of the additional hoops that the violator must go through. It's a kind of a catch-22, it seems to me, that we are imposing upon these people consequences for grievances which pretty much they are predisposed to commit. I mean, if they didn't have high school violations, then they would have no problem accommodating those other restrictions. But if the type of person that is prone to indiscretions such as high school league violations, probably they're also the type of person that's going to have a little problem being in school every day and no unexcused absences, etc. I see this whole issue as a wonderful opportunity for us to do what we're supposed to be doing, and that's educating students. And what better opportunity than to take some student who desperately wants to be involved in an activity and sit down with them and come up with a plan. And I you know, that maybe that's the plan, the unexcused absences, none of them, and et cetera. But personally, I would like to see something similar to an IEP, you know, with a special ed student. They're all different, you know, and one size doesn't fit all. And I'd like to see the student, the offender, the parents, the coach, and probably some administrators sit down and come up with an individual plan to be tacked on to the minimum high school league consequences. But it should be something which fits that student. And if I were on this committee, that would be my involvement.
As a former athletic director, and high school principal, and now superintendent, I have to say that I appreciate the work that you and the committee of coaches have done here. And I would say this, Neil, that if we were to go down the route of an IEP for these students, I can tell you, well, okay, you've got a different set of criteria for student A than you do for student B, than you do for student C. And what we would end up with is you're gaming the system because this kid's a better athlete than this kid. And so that's where the consistency of an approach, I mean, I understand the individuality of where you're going with here, but living it within a community and having held kids accountable, that's the concern I would have with that.
Yeah, I totally agree with you. Every solution has its own set of problems, and that would certainly be a big set of problems for that solution, which would be why I would suspect that probably this program would be very similar for every offender. Wouldn't be a whole lot of differences. But I'm just a little concerned that these people who are predisposed to mess up, you know, are given a whole laundry list of things that they can't do, and they're probably going to do them, and so, you know, they're going to fail again. Well, I just don't like setting up people for failure. But as I said earlier, I'm confident that you and your staff will come up with a program which will be very sensible.
Afton, could you go back to one of the first two slides? So A is the Minnesota minimum, and then B is what the district is adding. Is that okay? And I can see what Neil is saying too about that it can be more challenging for certain students to meet these than others, but maybe it would be an open door to have a little bit more in-depth conversations. Maybe we could even pull in some of our counseling staff along that area just to find out where are the holes, where are the gaps that we can help fill in these students' lives to become more successful all around. As far as the host or provider, is that just hosting to minors in general or other student athletes? Where are you going with that?
Our intention with that is that that's to hosting to anyone. You know, we found that there's been selling of things and or being a host of a party. More than likely, this is going to be clear cut. Is that the host, they are actually going to receive a social host violation from the law, and so that is something that we aren't going to dig into to determine that. We're truly going to see if they were hosting a party at their house and they were issued a social host violation.
And if they are required to do community service from another entity, does that coincide with ours, or is ours in addition to that?
That's a great question. It absolutely, what they have, their requirements that they would have with a legal citation would cover if there's community service hours. Also, we know that students, they go into a divergence program if they don't have anything else on their history. They do have to go to a chemical education course. That course would count for our requirements, as well as community service hours. Mm-hmm.
And to clarify, you had mentioned that all three of the all three of the steps that have to be concluded before they'd return to competition?
Correct. And that's where the chemical education course is really kind of our holdup. We talked about if they're enrolled, and that would be meeting the requirement to us if they were enrolled in a program. But then, of course, as we think, we're like, oh, how does that work? There can be some things where they get back to participation. It's right at the end of the season. They're a senior. They don't do their course. So we know that we're never going to have a flawless policy. We know it. But we want to just do what we can, again, for our students to be offered the best educational opportunities. And again, we absolutely understand that every situation is different. From a standpoint of me and dealing out these violations, it'll be extremely difficult to do a case-by-case situation. And I will say that it would probably be very, very rare in the state of Minnesota if we found a school that did a case-by-case policy. We understand that in a school setting, academically, the IEP situation, it's set up for success in that route. With these violations, though, it would be very hard for me to live with myself to say how am I going to value one person over another and require more or less, because I don't think that there's clear-cut details on what I would be looking for in that situation. It should be extremely hard for me to do my job fairly in that, to do a case-by-case. But I do understand that, yes, everyone comes from a different background, and if they're predisposed, absolutely. And that's where we come in, and we have that table talk with them to really talk through things that we can offer to support.
Yeah, thank you, Afton, and I can live with that. The thing that, as I said, that concerns me is setting up the student for failure. And if you have such a list of things that they must do, it's almost an inevitability that they're going to miss one of them, and then they're gone, they're out again. And it's frustrating for that person who, probably is not a heinous, terrible person. They just have a tendency to screw up now and then. And I've always, I guess, been somewhat sympathetic of that type, being sort of in that category myself.
I don't like I believe that we've got too many options growing in society. Maybe if you develop a policy like this, as much as this becomes an option, maybe you look at it and go, or you can have the option we have right now. If this isn't going to work for you for unexcused absences and things. By the way, I think the education course and unexcused absence, I think that's awesome, because I do think that we would like to get them back on track. And I really want to caution us always, we don't encourage underage substance abuse, but these kids are all underage. I mean, from a legal standpoint, they could all be cited, fined, and so I do see some problems when I talk with law enforcement of us not necessarily minimizing, maybe broadening the things that we'd have them do. Again, I think some really nice steps for them to go through, but again, I don't want to minimize anything because, and I don't want to miss half a season because they mess up once. I'd love to see all those kids out there, and extracurricular activities to me is as important, and we can say from the educational part, because you do learn both from each, and they both go hand in hand. But those would be the only comments, is just you know, I don't want to give an option, but maybe it's like if you can't do it this way, well, you've got the old set of rules that we had too. Just a thought.
Afton, could you put up the second violation? So is that the same, so on B, is it the same course they went through on the first violation? And why would you expect you'd get a different outcome?
Right, and that's why it's highlighted on that one too, because we're still discussing on that, is would we require additional courses on that? It would not be the same, because the example that I showed up for the Fountain Centers, they have a 4-hour class, but they also have a 12-hour class. So we discussed the options of, is it additional education? It would not be a repeat of the same thing because we know that that is not serving any purpose. So that's, again, that the chemical education course is what we're really stuck on, is how we're going to see that come through and be valuable.
And then, I'll just repeat myself from last meeting. I think if you have a second violation, which means you got caught again, you're no longer a student athlete, you're a student with a drug problem. And so any discussion about parts of the season, I think we're missing the point. That student has a problem, and we ought to see what resources we have to help that student, whether it's bad home life, you know, who knows why the student's having a drug problem. We're focusing too much on the athletic side at the second violation. I get every kid can screw up once, but when you screw up once and you're told we're watching you now, and you screw up again and get caught, you've got a drug problem. And then third violation, go to that one, it just seems to me like we're just abandoning them at that point. They can't participate in sports. Okay, well now that's a kid that's really got a problem. So what are we gonna do as a district for that kid? Those are the kids that concern me.
When I think at that point, that's when they're required to go to a chemical dependency program and then re-enter after a minimum of 1 year. And I was wondering, Afton, like if we're back at one or at the first or the second one, and they don't, for some reason they don't succeed at those 3 additional things, is there a restart time for them? For example, maybe somebody had a really rough 9th grade, and then they want to start sports again in 11th grade. They haven't had unexcused absences that entire time. Do they start over at the beginning of that year? When can they re-enter or try to have a successful run at it?
Yeah, that's a good question. Basically, a chemical violation can never come off of somebody's record, and that's a state high school league requirement. And so once they sign their state high school league compact, is that anytime they have any issues, that stays on. And so if they've had one, if they had a violation when they were a 9th grader, they didn't fulfill what our policy says, once they go back to participation, then basically they will start serving it at that point. Mm-hmm.
I would recommend too, just one thing. Don't go with an online course, because I think you know the real value of, as Jill would say, sitting down with someone, a counselor or something, to really help the kids through it more than just reading something. We can all read it on our phone. So, just a thought.
Okay. A lot of work to do yet, so thank you for the update there, Afton. Under 10.1, we've talked a lot about the bond referendum, and so we've talked. We were going to vote last time. We decided to postpone it because we needed some additional information. We didn't have everyone here. I know that we had talked about having the people from Springstead, who does our bond information, to be here tonight, but they were unable to do so. So the Finance Committee did meet with Kelly Smith from them, and so as we go through comments, maybe there's some comments you want to make regarding that. So so the Finance Committee was Neil and Dave and Mark. So to begin with, to get to discussion, I would entertain a motion.
I'll move to approve.
Enthusiastically move that we proceed with the project.
Okay.
I'll second it.
Okay, we have a motion and a second. So we'll go to further discussion.
Some of the things I'll mention just a few points. I did have an opportunity to talk to a large number of people in the last really month or so. And the vast majority has been overwhelmingly, as Neil said, enthusiastic to see us do something out there with our facilities, but not only our facilities, we're talking outside, we're also talking the Halverson School gymnasium, because what an opportunity. We talked about program, we talked about gym space. I also look at it as an opportunity to finally upgrade a building that has needed this probably for a long time. So we were all excited about that. Even the people that, how can I say, were a little bit more negative, and not really negative, more concerning about us spending this money, they were still saying, you know, they were talking the programming situation, which we all talked about before. So they weren't against the project. They were totally for the ADA upgrades and the handicap accessibility, the opportunities for our students to really have something that they can be proud of. As not only being proud, it's our community, because I hope we can make this into a community center with a Blue Zones walking course. And just, you know, at the Ryan Moore scholarship night, standing there talking to Ben Woodside, talking about how things over the years haven't been improved. And of course, he'd be pretty excited about Halverson too himself. But that was just another person from an aside that doesn't live here that thought what a wonderful opportunity. And it is an opportunity in my mind that our administration has allowed us to do with the financing situation. We can give back this $30, $40, $50, $100, what it is in a year, and that's something that we can do. But I would probably see the city, the county, or our watershed board find a way to use that money, and we still have crumbling facilities. So very much in favor of seeing this. Also, as a high school football official, I've had the opportunity to be at smaller schools than what we have that have a nice facility, not only for their students, but for us. When we go in there and we dress, we change, and just, you know, it is the face of the community. From the Finance Committee standpoint, we did have a nice meeting with Kelly Smith. The thing that I took away the most from that was, and I look at a lot of things, the cost of waiting. The cost of waiting, if we wait from May till, you know, even the November election, not knowing what interest rates are going to be, not knowing what construction costs will be, for sure it could be $500, and I think they showed us $580,000. Now that's a significant number. That's a good portion of any part of this project. So again, I think us moving along, or enthusiastically saying, as Joel, I see Joel back there saying, why have we waited so long? Let's get this done. And as most people said, let's do a little bit more.
Yeah, I'm very enthusiastic about this, and it's the timing is wonderful. I mean, we've paid off the previous bond in the high school and other items, and so it will not reflect a change in the amount of taxes that people pay, which seems to me to be a very good way to run a business, to keep your expenses level. And we're getting just, as far as I can see, an incredible amount of return for the amount of money that we're talking about. At this Finance Committee meeting that we attended, I heard stories of other districts floating bonds for $80 million and $100 million for improvements that, as far as I could see, were comparable to what we're doing, and we're dealing with about, you know, a fifth or a third of that. But there's so many neat things that can I mean, Jill or somebody last meeting talked about lights for the tennis court, you know, and that made me think, well, wait a minute, the tennis courts aren't too far from the softball and baseball complex. Maybe they could also avail themselves of the whatever facilities there are in that, you know, that hub, and all this. And you mentioned the city being involved in this and perhaps sharing costs and maintenance, so that our elderly citizens, anybody else who shows up, can make good use of these facilities as well. Including the field house structure. I've heard some people suggest that we're being a little extravagant here in the scope of this plan, and from what I've been hearing, we're not being extravagant. We're being rather frugal. We're not building a Taj Mahal of a stadium, a soccer and football stadium. It's modest, very useful, very. It will serve our needs very well, but it's not some luxury structure. And finally, we oftentimes as a community get criticized for not being progressive and for falling behind other communities. And boy, if we don't wholeheartedly get behind this, well, I think we're guilty, and we deserve what we get. I learned a long time as a boy growing up on the Score farm, going out to fetch cattle, that you do not jump across the creek in small increments. You end up in the mud every time. And so we need to, plunge forward and get on with this project. And I think the people who have laid it out have done a remarkable job. I've talked to Afton about some things that can be tweaked, here and there, and that's wonderful. The lights in the tennis court might be an example of that. But I would hesitate to assume the authority or the wisdom to make some kind of major alterations in this plan and micromanage it at this level. I'd just be a little nervous about that because if you start making major alterations, you're going to dampen the effectiveness of the project as a whole.
I would just add, I agree completely with the two that just spoke. A lot of this for me, these aren't wants, some of them are needs. I think we look at the American with Disability Act and the Office of Civil Rights with Title IX. If we don't do these things proactively, someone's going to come and make us do it on their timeline and their cost frame. So we need to act proactively. I couldn't agree more with this is a chance for Albert Lea to do something very positive and proactive. And then ultimately, we're not deciding to do it tonight. We're letting the public decide. And I've heard that before on this board for the last 8 years is let us decide. And that's what this vote is about, is letting the public decide it. So I am full support.
I've heard from a lot of community members too, and it's almost unanimously been very positive. And one person who had some concerns didn't understand where we're at right now, didn't understand that there was no running water except for in the field house. So I think we definitely need to make sure that we educate everyone, and I think that's the plan. But I think if everyone's educated, I think that we will by far and large have the support. And I did have one person talk to me about, do we want to go, like what Neil said, he doesn't feel this is that extravagant, but you know what I mean? But this is probably what we need. And that's what this community member said, basically kind of what Neil and Mark just said, that this is an opportunity for Albert Lea to get something nice. That this will be good not only for the school district, not only for the student athletes, this will be good for the city of Albert Lea. And that really kind of yeah, you're right, almost kind of got me thinking maybe, yeah, the whole community does deserve something like this. This is something that we all deserve. So that's kind of my thoughts, and I'm wholeheartedly in support as well.
I have a lot of input too from the community, and I guess my thoughts are that I know that it's important to address ADA regulations and also Title IX, and I'm always in favor of bringing things before the community to vote. I have a problem though in bringing this for a special election. I believe we could have brought it in a prior general election, but we were focusing on the calendar or whatever else was going on at the time. And I think if these issues were in such need, we really should have been on the ball and had that on the last general election. I feel that our lack of preparation for that does not constitute an emergency on the community's part. And even though we are bringing it for a special election, potentially, there is a statistical 15% bonus that would come our way, kind of giving ourselves a home field advantage to a certain extent. So I'm not against bringing it to the people for a vote. I would prefer to bring it in a general election. And I know that that would push it off, and there would be costs that come along with that, but we do need to be conscious of all of the costs, I think, that we're putting on the community, and to realize that we are only one taxing body of all of the taxing bodies that our community is dealing with. And I was told that both the Salvation Army and the United Way did not meet their goals last year, and in a lot of ways that does reflect community's spendable income. And I'm just concerned that our community's spendable income is shrinking for many families and many seniors, and so that is an issue that I do see, and that we need to be really conscious of the burden that we do put on the taxpayers and when we do it. And I won't be supporting a special election.
I appreciate everyone's comments. I just want to make a few. I guess I would agree that ideally we could do this in November, but I'm not willing to wait because I think the kids deserve it. I think their costs will go too high. And so I think that we added 3 voting places a month ago. We also will have absentee ballots that will be available starting March 23rd. And for those that want to vote, I think there'll be plenty of opportunities. I just think that right now the timing is right. I think that from a financial standpoint, I think that we've managing well, and I think I've mentioned previously that when it comes to businesses, and we're kind of in a business, it's good practices to spend on an ongoing basis on capital expenditures. And so in my experience, we've always kept them even or slightly increasing, and so I think that when we can keep it even, I think it's been good. And I've lived in Albert Lea almost all my life, and I know that no one likes to spend money, and I'm in that category too. But I know the generations before me spent money on me so I could have a quality education, quality facilities, and I think it's part of our responsibility to kind of continue that process. And I hadn't been in that field house for many, many years, but as we went through it and toured that night, it definitely was something that needs to be done, especially for Title IX, in my opinion. And so when we, before the vote, we're going to have tours and so on, if we do approve this. And so I think it'd be a chance for the community to see what we saw. I think that's important. And then, as everyone has mentioned, that they can decide. But bottom line for me, it's I want to do it now because it should have been done before. It should have been done for the students. I think that when I came on this board, I always said I want to do what's best for students, and I feel that this is best for students. I think it's the best thing for the community of Albert Lea, and will allow us to make a statement. So if there are no other comments.
I kind of agree with what you just said, and I think I would have preferred to have a November election too. I just like the masses to make sure everyone gets their voice heard. But I think with interest rates and things, I think that we do need to do it now. I do, and I do feel comfortable with that. especially knowing that we added those polling places. There are some districts that scrunch up their polling places on purpose to give themselves a home field advantage, and we're not doing that. So I do feel comfortable. I do think we need to get the information out and make sure everyone is very aware so that we can get everyone's input. You know, I think it's very important, not only to educate them specifically, but just of the vote in itself. They need to know so we can hear their voices. But I do feel comfortable. I think that we are doing the right thing here, especially with having more polling places. Too bad it couldn't be in November, but I think we're doing the right thing.
Okay, and I might add also in response to Jill, for whom I have a profound respect for everything you say, and I understand your argument, but on the other hand, there are always two or more than one way of looking at things. You know, I've voted in general elections in November for a long time now, and when I go into the, you know, behind the curtain and fill out all the circles, I'm embarrassed to discover that just to pick a statistic out of the sky, 30% of things I'm voting for, I have no idea who is this person running for a judge or whatever, and so it's kind of a scary proposition when the general population appears to vote on a whole laundry list of things, some of which they know absolutely nothing. And on the other hand, here we have an opportunity for one election, and if people want to become mobilized in opposition to this, by golly, I hope they do, you know, and show up and vote for this one thing, and they will all understand what they're voting for. And if we have people, I hope we have people who mobilize in favor of it. The people that are going to show up to vote for this are going to be people who want to vote for this, not people who just happen, oh, what's this on the ballot? Well, taxes, I don't think I'll vote for that. I'm going to vote against it because, you know, they have no vested interest in it. But I respect your opinion.
Thank you, I appreciate that. And I should clarify too, another reason that I believe waiting would be beneficial would be that that we can ensure this is the best road to take for a comprehensive benefit to the athletic program. This is very concentrated as far as facilities, and I agree they're not extravagant, but they're not really minimalistic either or utilitarian. And there may be some kind of middle ground that we could move to free up some of the community's desires where they want their money to go, and that might free up some more for programs, that type of thing, to have more of a comprehensive view on the athletic department rather than kind of committing ourselves for the next 20 years for the 24 million, I think that's what it is, for this project. And the people I talk to are willing to pay if it's going to be some benefit that they believe is worthwhile to students. And everything I've heard about Halverson Gym has been positive all the way through. But I guess we've only been presented this one plan. And I guess I would have liked to have had some different ones to look at, or, you know, to talk maybe about how much we wanted to put into this pot of an election, of this whole chunk of money. We didn't really have that conversation. So I'm feeling like it's best to wait and maybe have a few more conversations about that. Thank you.
I think an important point in this is not the final design. And so, as I think it's prudent for us not to spend the money for the final design before the public votes. And then once the public decides one way or the other, then we can decide whether at that time the actual final plan would be determined. And I know that's hard, but at the same time, I don't think it's, we should, if the public comes back and says, don't spend it, we didn't spend a lot of money, coming up with a bunch of designs that cost a lot of money, and so I think that's a prudent way to do it.
Dr. Funk, maybe you can answer this. I was not involved in the determination of the scope of this project, and I was not involved in determining how much money we were going to spend on this project, but I have a sneaking suspicion that the whole thing is a result of coming up with an amount of money which would be consistent with, which would present a tax burden that's consistent with what we have been doing, and then and very nicely put together a project which would use that amount of money and at the same time serve our needs. I'm probably wrong about that, but I'm just wondering.
If the board recalls, this fall we conducted a survey, a thought exchange with the community, okay, and we asked top to bottom, I think there are 300 and some responses. What are your concerns about our community facilities? And resoundingly, overwhelmingly, the whole Hammerfield complex was a concern. Receiving the feedback from that, we then sat down with two groups of people, planners to look at the Hammer complex, and Halverson gym space was also an issue that came up. So we talked with planners on that, and then we also talked with finance folks. And we talked about, okay, here's kind of the need from what we're hearing about from the community. What can we do? And they came back, and I will tell you, I actually had to push them a little bit because they came back very conservative in their approach to what they were putting together for us. And I think you all got to see it at the facilities committee, the kind of the final product that they brought together there. And then I would say the only ad that we really, the couple options they gave us was the Halverson gym option. And one of the options there was with, it wasn't as nice of a gym, and it didn't have any seating area, and that was an upgrade we added to ended up bringing a little more dollar amount to the project. So we knew kind of the ballpark we were going to be in, and I was hopeful that we were going to be able to come back to the voters and say, or to the board and say, we can do this at a minimal tax increase. And that's what I was predicting. But the financial folks said, well, because of where the bond rates are at, we're able to do it at a 0% increase. So that's kind of the background on how we brought this together. I think the design firm we worked with, they're used to working with public entities, and they understand when we present them, here are our needs, they are going to give us, here are the basics that we can provide you. They're not going to give us a real extravagant plan because they're used to working with public entities. And so that's what we ended up with. So it's a long answer to your question, but that's what I got.
Okay. If there's no other comments, I'll call the question. Did you have a comment?
Just make sure you go ahead and do a roll call, Ken, and just, because it is a resolution.
Okay. We'll do a roll call vote, and I'll start with Angie. Aye. Mark?
Aye.
No. Aye. Motion passes 5-1. I think it's important, I just wanted to mention, I think it's important that we do get the information out to the voters, and we need to make it very, very clear that this is a tax increase, and so of what they could have, but it's keeping things consistent with the past. So every meeting that we have, and I would ask the board if there's people that want to get the information, that we should do that. I think we've talked about having all 4 elementaries have meetings there. We've talked about the service clubs, and there are, I'm sure, senior citizens organizations and others that we need to be presenting at. And so I would certainly encourage the board to get anyone that they think that would benefit from the presentation. I don't know how you want to gather that.
Yeah,
Mike, but-
what we could do is I would encourage board members to contact me directly if you want us to come speak at a certain club or any organization in town. I will tell you now that the board has green-lighted the project proposal for the election in May, that the administration this week will be planning an outreach campaign to educate the community. And as part of that, I can tell you that we will be meeting at every school in the evening, sometime this spring, with PTOs, and we'll make them public meetings to everybody. And then, in addition to that, we'll be meeting with each school staff during the day at the end of school or before school starts in the morning to provide them information on it. And then I know that Afton and Mark have had a facilities committee, and I know that they're meeting with boosters as well to get that information out there. So I think, I heard you loud and clear, Angie, that we need to get the information out, and we will have a strong effort to have this community educated on this plan.
Sarah, maybe even if you could make a comment in the paper that we're available for meetings, so that would be great. And I think what's important here is that we do get the message out and that the community decides what they want. So, moving on now, we'll go to 10.2, and it's amended budget. Lori.
Mr. Chairman of the board, Superintendent Funk, and board members, for your consideration is approval of the amended budget for this current fiscal year. And so I want to hit the highlights. Main point is we're in a good, solid financial situation. First, I want to point out, if you want to look at the blue highlighted section, in the general fund, the main, very important component of that general fund financials is what's called the unassigned fund balance. So the main operations of the general fund is reflected there. You'll see that we're basically at a break-even budget. Revenues are almost exact on with expenses, and the unassigned with just a slight gain of a little over $1,000. And so our fund balance would be maintaining at this current level. I do want to point out also some unique categories. So for the restricted for the long-term facility maintenance, you'll see that we have expenses more than our revenues, and the only reason we have that scenario is the fact that the big capital project that we're going to be doing this summer, due to making sure that that project is done before school starts, we need to start that project in June. So the expenses for the June component of that work is reflected in this budget. The funding for it will come in next year, so it will rectify itself with next year's budget. It will even out, but that is why it's showing a loss or excess expense of $270,000 is due to that project timing. And having a negative fund balance and restricted for LTFM, I did check with the State Department actually on that, and there is no problem with that. It can, due to timing of projects, can be a somewhat common occurrence, so it'll just resurrect itself in the next fiscal year. Just wanted to explain that particular line item. Otherwise, a lot of the reserves, if there is a negative, for example, Q comp, we had a carryover we had to spend down. Same thing with staff development. And so in that gain or loss column, if there's in brackets, that means it's a spend down, and that is the reason for that. So again, I want to emphasize that we're in a good, solid financial situation in the general fund. Otherwise, just also want to just touch on community service. We have estimated fund balance to be, in a fine state there for community service. They're still projected to have like $175,000 overall in that fund. But you can see in the variety of reserves, again, it's a planned spend down. it's just offering additional programming and using that fund balance down to a little more reasonable level. So basically, that is highlights on that chart I wanted to show you. Angela, if you can move to page 8. I just want to point out interesting nuance. On page 8, it summarizes our general fund expenses by object code. And a unique category I just want to point out and explain, because we'll be talking about this regarding the fund balance policy shortly. But in the general fund, in the category of other expense, you'll see that when you compare the original budget for 17-18 to the amended budget, it went from, in the category of other expense, it went from $49,000 to $1.2 million. And the reason for that jump is unique nuance that came through for the first time in the 16-17 year. And what it is it's a unique accounting transaction that the state of Minnesota is paying TRA and PRA expenses on behalf of our district to those various pension plans. And for the first time, the accounting methodology changed for that. So what happened is that in last year, there was $1.2 million of this TRA, PRA expense that we had to put on our books, even though we didn't make the direct expense, but we had to record the transaction that the state made. So in visiting with our auditors, they're recommending that we budget for that as what hit our actual books last year. So that's why I am budgeting for it on the expense side. Now keep in mind, it's bottom line neutral. The expense comes through on our books, but on the revenue side, we book the revenue as well, so it's flow through. But I do want to point that out. You'll see that on page 6 then, if you scroll back to the revenue summary, you'll see that exact scenario there where we budgeted, I budgeted for that revenue of that TRA, PRA special funding rate there of the 1.2 million. So that is why that line item did go up as much as it did compared to the original budget. And again, it's revenue neutral as far as bottom line neutral. The revenue offsets the expense as it's recorded. So just keep that in mind as we'll talk pretty soon about the fund balance policy. But I also want to recommend that as the 17-18 budget is approved, to also include this paragraph that the board is giving approval for future amendments of this 17-18 budget for expenditure-driven grants and state or federal programs as for MDE approval through the end of the fiscal year. And management control is given at a line item level. And the reason I bring this language each year is, for example, our federal grants such as Title I, II, and III, and federal special ed, for example. We may be making small tweaks to that to align with our actual expenses at year end. In fact, we must. We're required to amend our budgets to align exactly to the penny to the actual expense that was made. So rather than me having to bring back this budget again to you for that tiny little tweak, we just cover it with this paragraph so that we're covered going forward for those final adjustments. Any questions?
Well, I hope we get a lot of grants, so we can amend our budget anyway. So, any questions or comments for Lori?
I'd just like to say, as treasurer, I work with Lori, and I'm not doing the work, but she keeps me updated on it, and it's a tremendous amount of work that she goes through here in 2 minutes, and so I just wanted to thank her again.
Thank you.
Okay. I'd entertain a motion then to approve the amended budget. There's motion's been made. Is there a second? Second. Okay, we have a motion to second. Any further discussion? Okay, all those in favor of the amendment on the 2017-28 amended budget on the 27-18 budget signify by saying aye. Aye. Post same sign. Motion carries. Next, we have a review on policy 714 on the fund balance. Lori.
Mr. Chairman, members of the board, and Superintendent Funk, each year as we approve the final amended budget, we review the fund balance policy. And currently, our fund balance policy, as you may recall, indicates a target of 14% of our fund balance as a percentage of expense. And what I'm recommending is adding some phrasing there for that fund balance target. And due to this unique situation of that TRA, PRA special funding situation pension expense, the 1.2 million that came into play for the first time last year, even though we're getting the revenue on the revenue side to offset that, the fund balance policy is based on total expense on the expense side to determine the fund balance level. So I'm proposing, what I'm recommending to the board, to make it less cumbersome, basically, is to exclude that TRA, PRA special funding situation pension expense from the calculation, and also exclude long-term facility maintenance and operating capital from that calculation to align with, to determine our fund balance target. So by doing this, for example, LTFM already has their own reserve fund balance, and operating capital does as well. And by implementing this particular language, with this budget I brought to you, we are basically right at very, very, very close to the 14%. And so we would be in alignment. As a side note, in my previous district, we had a very similar fund balance policy, but what we also, we did exclude operating capital. Back in the day, it was health and safety. That was before long-term facility maintenance. And we actually did that exclusion as well on the fund balance calculation for those exact reasons, that they had their own reserve. So that is, I'm just explaining why that was, I'm proposing that to be tweaked in this fashion.
Laura, if we didn't, because of this extra 2 million from TRA, PERA, if we didn't exclude that, what's the impact of that flow through on our fund balance?
The fund balance calculation, if we don't include this additional phrasing, our fund balance would actually be, I believe it's like, I have it here somewhere, it's 13.2%, and then, here we go, whoops, yep, it's 12.8% actually, is where we'd be at if we didn't have this exclusion. And the amount of, if we're going to hold firm with trying to arrive at our fund balance, we'd be looking at cuts if we want to achieve our fund balance target, and I just don't think that's right. We have a balanced budget. We have a balanced budget, so why would we ever do that?
And this is because of a paper requirement.
That is correct.
That has been added by the Department of Education.
It's an accounting rule.
Okay, it's an accounting rule.
Yep.
So back to the concerns that I think I heard from both Neil and Angie last spring when we're looking at cuts. All right. Go ahead, Neil.
Would another way of looking at this, finances aren't my specialty, but we're talking about $1.2 million, which has been added to our expenses. So, in other words, if we then continued a 14% fund balance, we would have to have 14% of $1.2 million in the fund balance that we didn't have to have before, which would be the money that we couldn't spend on other things.
Correct.
Got it.
Yep, you got it.
So bottom line is it would require us to make cuts, and I think none of us want to go there as long as we have the budget that we have, so we feel comfortable. So any further questions or comments? I would entertain the motion then to adopt that change in the wording on policy 714. Is there a motion to do so? Is there a second?
Second.
Okay, we have a motion and a second. Any further discussion? Okay. All those in favor of approving the changes to policy 714 signify by saying aye. Aye. Pose same sign. Motion carries. I would entertain a motion then to adjourn.
So moved.
Okay, is there a second?
Second.
Meeting is adjourned.